Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Night Tales. Before we dive in, please show your support, give this video a like, and be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so that you don't miss future videos. So let's get started. The first story. I was visiting my best friend in a foreign country. Now everyone is telling me that he doesn't exist. I'm sorry, the officer exhaled a cloud of smoke in my face, but no one with that name lives here. Or has ever lived here. The old woman who'd called the cops on me had a face like a withered apple. She leaned out from behind the officer's brawny back and nodded as if to reinforce how crazy I must be. It was ridiculous. I had just stepped out to buy some fruit at the market, but it had taken longer than expected. When I got back, these psychos all started telling me that my best friend Ryan Fletcher, in whose apartment I'd left my luggage and passport and all of my money, didn't exist. There was a wall of neighbors behind the old woman now, their stupid smiling faces nodding up and down like bobbleheads. No, they confirmed, no Ryan Fletcher here. The worst part was that one of them, the bald guy in the leather jacket, had talked to Ryan and I on our way up the stairs less than an hour ago. Something was very, very wrong. I looked around stubbornly for some sign, some proof, but in the 30-odd minutes that I'd been gone, Ryan's name had even disappeared from the apartment buzzer. The officer let out another puff of smoke. This time it was short, dangerous, like the snort of an angry bull. As you see, the person you are looking for is not here, and you are disturbing the neighbors. You need to move on, or I have to charge you with vagrancy. He waved his hand, struggling to find the English word. There must be some mistake. Ryan. There is no Ryan, the Spanish official snapped. Entonces. I can drive you to the nearest train station. You can call your embassy, arrange your return. He tossed his cigarette onto the cobblestones and snuffed it out, or I place you under arrest. It was a bumpy ride through the brown Andalusian hills. Tiny villages just like the one where Ryan had moved to a year ago were scattered between huge groves of olive trees. I wondered if any of them held a secret as strange as the one I'd just left. The officer arranged my ticket with the station agent, they seemed to be old friends, and then waited for me to board my train. It would have been a kind gesture if it weren't for the obvious tension, the desire to see me go, just like Ryan's neighbors had shown. There was one other thing, too. And it was the reason I got off the train at the next stop and wheedled a cab driver into taking me back to Ryan's town. I hadn't wanted to just leave, but fear of jail had gotten me moving. Walking to the officer's car, however, I noticed an orange plastic strip under a dumpster by the back exit to Ryan's apartment. It was a Nickelodeon watch, a match to the one I'd worn myself for 13 years, ever since Ryan and I got them on a middle school class trip. I wasn't crazy. Ryan was in that town somewhere, and his ripped-off watch was underneath a dumpster. My best friend was in trouble. I had to go back. Dusk had fallen on the scruffy brown hills and jagged gorges by the time the cabbie dropped me off. All the money I had left wasn't nearly enough for the 40-minute taxi ride, and the driver started to shout. A light went on in a nearby house. If that cop caught me here again. All I could offer the cabbie was my phone. It was, almost, the latest iPhone, and without it I'd be truly disconnected, but what choice did I have? The cabbie grudgingly accepted on the condition that I'd pay him for real as soon as I could, with interest. It wasn't easy negotiating in with my high school Spanish, but at least it got him to keep his voice down. As the taxi rumbled back down the hill, there weren't many figures watching from their high, golden-lit village windows, but there were enough to make me nervous. Small-town nosiness alone didn't explain the watchfulness of this place. More than the echo of my footsteps followed me through the empty cobblestone streets. I was sure of it. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a scream. Then another. The silence of the narrow streets and muggy Andalusian night magnified the agonized roars until they seemed to come from everywhere. I pushed myself against a crumbling wall, expecting mobs of psychopaths to charge out of the dark alleys and tear me limb from limb. But there was only the screaming, and somehow, it sounded like Ryan's voice. I'd seen the half-crumbled ruins of an ancient tower when I'd first arrived in town, walled off by construction fencing. It seemed to be coming from there. Sure enough, a faint light glowed from a basement-level window. As I slipped through a gap in the fencing and into the weeds, I realized that the tiny light was moving. Then another scream chilled my blood. I was getting closer. While the tower was in ruins, its dungeon was apparently intact. Heavy footsteps lumbered up the stairs. I heard a smoker's cough and rattling keys. I lay flat on the ground, hoping that the tall grass and shadows would hide me. The weary-eyed cop stepped out and closed the door. He locked the door behind him and lay his forehead against its cool wood like a man overwhelmed by his circumstances. The screaming continued, but neither the cop nor anyone else in town seemed to notice or care. Joder, que hasta un puto giri ha pelado nuestra puta maldición. He muttered to himself as he walked away, leaving the key in the lock. Once the cop was gone, I slipped inside the tower. The noise was even worse behind its thick stone walls. The agonized shouts seemed to reverberate inside my skull. And of course, without my phone I had no light. I crawled like an animal into the humid darkness below. I could hear other things, now, too. A body, or several, being slammed against metal bars. Clanking chains. A scraping sound I didn't like to think about. Something horrible was happening down there. Feeling my way across a flagstone landing, I grasped something familiar, my luggage. The bastards had my luggage. I wasn't crazy. Ryan really was down here. But what was making him scream like that? In the short time we'd been together, Ryan had told me how well he got along with his neighbors. Now I was imagining those same people dressed in inquisitor's robes, torturing my friend with hot irons. At the bottom level, there were no inquisitors, just thick puddles of slime on the weathered floor and walls. The source of the screaming was so close I felt like I could reach out and touch it. I moved forward like a blind man, gripping the key ring tightly. Just in case, I told myself, but in case of what, I wasn't sure. My hand closed around cold metal. Bars. Chains rattled in pitch blackness ahead. Adam, a hoarse voice asked, nearly made me scream myself. It was Ryan's voice, no doubt about it. Is that you? What's going on, man? Are you all right? I whispered back. No. Ryan nearly growled, it's, these people, this place, they're nuts. Some kind of cult. They locked me in here, man. In chains. It hurts so bad, you've got to get me out of her, Arga. Ryan's voice broke off into a horrible wailing scream. I never imagined human lungs could make such an anguished sound. Does it hurt that bad? Why, yeah, Ryan rasped. Please, please just hurry and get me out of here. There's a lever that unhooks the chains and opens the door. On the wall. Hurry. Please. The chains moved closer. More clanging followed. I realized that there was more than one cell down here in the darkness. Other voices, male and female, young and old, called out to me, Ayudanos, poor favor. Ayudanos. Every voice was parchment dry from screaming. I fumbled for the lever Ryan had described, knocking something metal off a table in the process. An instrument of torture? I had no idea. What were all these people being locked up for? Human sacrifice. A punishment for breaking some cult's list of rules. I couldn't begin to guess. But they were clearly in terrible pain. I kept feeling for Ryan's lever, and jumped at every shriek. When my hands found the worn iron lever, I pulled right away, but it took all my strength to set the ancient mechanism in motion. With a metallic screech, every cell door swung open and every shackle was released. Then all of the prisoners screamed at once. I covered my ears and crouched on the floor. Dozens of running footsteps rushed past me and up the stairs. I followed. Outside, someone was approaching the tower door. Los Slaves DNDE Co Esten. As Ryan and the rest burst through the door, I caught a glimpse of a police uniform. But only a glimpse. Ryan swung his hand at the middle-aged man's neck and screamed. The others returned his shriek in a horrible chorus as they poured into the nighttime streets. I'd never seen the middle-aged cop before, but I could only crouch terrified in the doorway while my best friend gouged at his throat. Ryan didn't stop, not even when the man's neck was nothing more than a gory mess. The rest of the screamers were jumping fences, pulling on doors, climbing up walls to find unlatched windows. Now two kinds of screams echoed through the village, those of the hunters and those of the hunted. Suddenly Ryan was in front of me, nostrils sniffing like he was following a scent. Despite the awful yell coming from his lips, a Ronald McDonald smile covered his face. His eyes were as glossy and unseeing as those of a taxidermied animal. Rough hands grabbed me from behind and threw me to the ground. Pero chu has heko. Chu ko'o has heko, what have you done? The cop whispered in that familiar smoke-worn voice. We watched as an elderly woman crawled up a stone wall, ripped open a window, and threw herself at the sleeping shapes inside. She was clawing and biting their most vulnerable parts before they could even wake up. The door of a village house flew open. A family fled toward their car, pursued by a pair of screamers. 3 shrieking school-aged girls leapt onto the mother, dragging her into the dirt. Their teeth glistened, crimson in the glow of the streetlights. We must go. Carefully, the cop kept his hand on my back, making me keep low as we backed up through the weeds toward the hole in the fence. Our pace felt painfully slow, and it took every ounce of willpower I had to inch through the weeds on my belly instead of running like a panicked deer. By the time we reached the fence, my shirt was soaked with sweat. I was about to slip through the gap in the fence when I saw them. 2 freakishly extended shadows cast by the streetlights, screamers crossing the plaza. I didn't move, or even breathe, until those glossy-eyed faces had passed. Now I could see our destination, the cops' patrol car, parked in front of the silent town hall. All was quiet. The unearthly shrieks and sounds of violence seemed far away. Not even the spiky grass tickling my face moved in the sticky night air. 4 screams, 2 on either side of us, shattered the silence. Ahora, the cop bellowed, as fast as you can. He didn't look back when he took off, and I didn't either, but I heard the screamers who'd crept up on us from the other side of the fence charging across the cobblestones behind us. Down each narrow street, others heard their call and answered, closing us in from all directions. I ran to the car as fast as I could. Something wailed when I slammed the door. With disgust, I shoved its grasping broken hand back out into the night before slamming it again. Slams came from every direction, threatening to break the windows, yet the cop backed out slowly, doing his best not to injure our attackers. Once free of the crowd, he stepped on the gas, sending the outdated police car careening through the olive groves and hairpin turns outside of town. He didn't stop until we reached a cliff overlooking the main plaza. Something was burning down there, and we could hear the screams even from so far away. The cop got out of the car, sighed, and lit a cigarette. I noticed the pistol at his hip for the first time. Why didn't you shoot them? I panted. Pews, tomorrow they will be just like you or me, with no memory of what they have done. It is the curse of this place. Pewdpasura Kiwalkira. There are signs, when we see them, we lock the dangerous ones in the dungeon, like we have always done. The pain of being one of them, it is horrible. Inaguantable. Something told me that the weary cop had been a screamer himself, maybe more than once. You can't just leave. Some tried. They brought the curse with them. Lo esperican. Then they were killed. I think someone in the government must know. We get a little money, just enough to live on, in exchange for staying here, he snorted. In the past, they just killed us, Enchins. Nos Lamarin Brujos. Each time, the reach of the curse became larger and larger. And Ryan? I asked. Tu amigo, he spent a night here before anyone in town knew or could stop him. We hoped he would not be affected, but once we saw the signs, it was already too late. I wanted to save you, Alminos, but now it is too late for you, too. He put out his cigarette and drew his pistol. Asterisk. I've lived here ever since. I never imagined that this would be my life. I wish so much to see a new face. But please, don't come to visit. Not unless you plan to stay forever. X. The second story. I didn't know my ex-boyfriend was dead when he texted me. It had been 6 weeks since I broke up with Mike. We'd been having issues for months, but I wasn't able to get over the fact that he shut me out of his life throughout the entirety of our relationship. For reference, we're both men and we were together for 2 years. He wasn't out to his friends or family, so nobody in his life knew we were even together. It was the reason why I was the last one to find out about his death, so I feel like I need to elaborate on that. Well, that, and I blocked him on all my social media accounts. But I didn't block his number. Saturday 2:51 a.m. Mike, are you awake? Me, why are you texting me? Mike, I miss you. Me, whatever game you think you're playing, I'm not interested. If you're drunk and need help, I can book an Uber for you. Otherwise, don't text me again. No response. I shrugged it off and tried to distract myself with some Netflix. He was probably just looking for a booty call. I ended up falling asleep 2 hours later. The next day, I met up with my best friend for brunch. She was probably the only thing that kept me together through the breakup. I don't know what I would have done without her. We met at a little cafe in our neighborhood. The first thing she did was ask me why I didn't get any sleep. I swear, nothing could get past this woman. I was just binging TVD again, I said. What's wrong? She sounded more concerned now. Jane, it's nothing. I just had to finish up some work and I had a hard time falling asleep afterward, I insisted. She didn't sound convinced. Our coffee arrived and I practically chugged the damn thing. Jane knew that I only ever watched TVD when something was troubling me. I could feel her gaze on me from behind my cup. Lee, I know you, and I know when something's bothering you, she pushed further. Jane wasn't exactly Mike's biggest fan and for good reason. But that was precisely why I had a hard time opening up to her about him. I knew that she would never judge me, I just didn't know if she would understand why I responded to his text messages in the first place. The truth is, I still had feelings for him and it's hard to admit that to anybody. I decided to show her the text messages. She remained quiet for a while before finally responding. You know, it's okay if you still care about him. I get that, I do. Do you want some advice or do you just need someone to listen? What she said shocked me. I have this bad habit of thinking the worst of people even if I know that they have good intentions. I guess trauma does that to you. Advice, I decided. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding in. I need to stop pushing people away. Like I said, it's okay to care about him, I just don't think it's a good idea to let him back into your life again. Ultimately, it's up to you. But given his track record, I would highly recommend against it. She held my hand as she said this. Thanks, I know. I just feel like we didn't have the closure we needed, I said hesitantly. Honestly, I kept wishing he would show up at my doorstep and beg me to take him back at some point. But I moved to a new apartment 2 weeks ago and he doesn't know my new address, so that would have been impossible now. I was never going to say that out loud, though. If that's what you need to get over him, then go for it. We talked a bit more over brunch, eventually said our goodbyes, then I went home. My dog, Kaya, greeted me at the door, wagging her tail happily. I was glad I had someone to go home to. I gave her a gentle pat on the head as I set my stuff down on the kitchen counter. The rest of the day was uneventful and I fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie. I woke up at around 3 a.m. when my phone dinged. Sunday, 3:03 a.m. Mike, I know you said not to text you again, but I really need to talk to you. Me, what could you possibly need to talk about at 3 in the morning? Mike, I don't mean right now but in person. I don't like how we ended things. My heart skipped a beat. I was just talking to Jane about that yesterday. It was kind of weird that he brought that up so soon after I had the conversation, but then again, I felt the exact same way. I just don't know if I want to tell him that. My phone dinged again. Mike, can I see you? Me, fine. You can come over tomorrow. But I recently moved. It might be a bit of a drive for you. Mike, that's all right. I texted him my new address and he said he'll see me soon. I went back to sleep when our conversation ended. When I woke up, the sun had just started to rise. I was kind of expecting not to get much sleep anyway. I got ready for the day and had some breakfast. I decided to take my dog to the park to clear my head. I still wasn't sure if seeing Mike again was a good idea. What if we just ended up sleeping together or something? Or worse, got back together? My thoughts started to spiral. Something in the corner of my eye snapped me out of it. It was like I was being watched, but barely. I was sitting on a bench while passively watching Kaya run around with the other dogs. It felt like someone was behind the tree past the bench beside me. I decided to take a peek, but no one was there. I chalked it up to not getting enough sleep for the past 2 nights in a row. Come on, Kaya. Time to go, I called to her. She ran toward me happily and I gave her some treats and a hug before getting up to leave. Nothing really happened on the walk home, but I still couldn't shake that feeling the whole time. Needless to say, I was relieved when I got to my apartment. That relief didn't last. Sunday, 10:17 a.m. Richard, hey, Lee. It's Richard. I'm not sure if you remember me. We met at Mike's party a few months ago. It was a Facebook message from Mike's brother. Me, hi, yes, I remember. What's up? Richard, this might be a bit overdue, but honestly, between the funeral and the grieving, it's been kind of hard to get the news out to some of Mike's newer friends. I just wanted to let you know he passed away last weekend. I almost wanted to ask him if he was sure. Luckily, I stopped myself in time. That would have been insensitive. Of course he was sure. Me, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you for taking the time to let me know. Sorry if this comes across as insensitive, but can I ask who currently has his phone? Richard, we never found it, actually. It probably got lost in the accident. Did you need something from it? Me, no, he just had a few photos from an old trip with some friends, but it's not important. Richard. Well, I'll let you know if it ever turns up. Me, that won't be necessary, but thank you. What? I tried to rack my brain for some type of logical explanation. Maybe Richard was playing some sort of messed up prank, but I seriously doubt that. Maybe someone else found Mike's phone and decided to pull a prank on me. Whatever it was, I felt sick. Then I remembered, whatever sicko had his phone had my address now too. I packed mine and Kaya's stuff and called Jane. I told her I needed a place to stay for a few days and she didn't even ask me why, just said I can stay as long as I need to. She's a lifesaver. Maybe even literally, given the situation. I wasted no time and bolted the hell out of there. When I arrived, Jane asked me if everything was all right. I told her I might have a stalker situation and would need to move. She was extremely worried and said I needed to call the police. I was seriously considering it. But I don't even know how I would go about explaining this situation. They might not even take me seriously. After dinner, Jane set me up on the couch and then excused herself to the bedroom. Kaya was asleep on the floor next to the couch. I couldn't fall asleep. I went through my photos of Mike and started crying. I couldn't believe he was actually gone. I couldn't believe someone was sick enough to pretend to be him. I got an app notification from the doggy cams I set up around the apartment for Kaya. It said it detected movement. My stomach started doing somersaults and I could barely stop myself from puking. But I needed to check it out. I opened the app. My heart was racing when I saw what was on the screen. There, in my living room, was a man I had never seen before in my life. He was extremely thin, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. His hair was dark and long, not like Mike's short blonde hair. But more than that, he didn't look right. Ding. Monday, 3:09 a.m. Mike, where are you? The third story. My 2-year-old is seeing something. My 2-year-old girl has been acting strange lately. When we lay her down, she's been saying things like, "Who is that?" and pointing to the ceiling corner. She's also been saying, "She's looking at me," and saying that it looks like her 5-year-old sister. We took a photo of where she was pointing and showed her. We asked her if it was in the photo, but she said, "It not in phone, it up there." It's starting to creep me out, but I'm not too worried about it. I've seen lots of stories like this, and I'm wondering if anyone else here has experienced something similar. How did you handle it? I just don't want my baby to be scared. The fourth story. The uncanny man I met in a room that doesn't exist. When I turned 18, me and 2 of my friends decided to take a trip to our local casino. We mostly just played simple games like slots and video roulette since it was our first time going to a casino. After losing some money, we decided to search for something to eat. Pretty much everything was way too overpriced, so we wandered around for quite a bit. Eventually we reached a hallway along the border of the main floor. We made our way down the hall looking for food, but everything was closed. We started to notice that the hall was completely vacant of people. As we wandered further down the hall, we reached an oddly intriguing small room through a double doorway. This was the only entrance into the room. It was completely empty except for us 3 and about 10 to 20 slot machines. We were bored, so I decided to throw $5 into the slot machine and spin a few times. After my second or third spin, an odd-looking man, early to mid-30s, appeared from behind the slot machine, seemingly out of thin air. He began watching me play and started getting uncomfortably close to us. We weren't very worried since we outnumbered him 3 dudes to 1, however, we were very confused. We grew more and more uneasy the longer he stood there, not saying a word. Eventually my friend decided to ask him what's up. The man looked at us for a second before asking if we were all brothers. None of us look even remotely similar, so we told him we're all just friends. He said, "Oh, that's great," and proceeded to ask if he could join our group. We told him that we all came together and lied in saying that we were actually planning on leaving soon. He told us that we should stay and play with him and says, "My good friend Rachel over there knows all the good machines," and points towards the other side of the room. We slowly peer around the machine and all immediately became horrified. Nobody else was in the room with us, he was pointing into an empty corner. We all stand up from our seats and slowly back out of the room, not letting our eyes leave the man. Once he was out of sight, we turned around and sprinted down the hallway back to the main game room. We all vowed to never go back down that hallway ever again, and I never did, but curiosity eventually got the better of us. About a year and 2 many casino trips later, we're playing blackjack back at the same casino with a 4th friend. He gets bored and hungry and says we should look for food. After walking around looking for food, we made it back to the entrance of that very hallway that we vowed never to return to. The 4th friend said we should search down there for food. The rest of us tell him no and explain to him that we can't go back down there. He asks why, so we tell him about our experience down that hallway 1 year prior. He said we're bullshitting and that there's no room of slot machines in the location we described. He explains that Mom was a worker at the casino and he would know if there was a rogue room of slots in the middle of nowhere. So we did the one thing we could do to convince him of our experience. We decided to lead him to the room. We made our way down the hallway in search for the room, but after walking for a few minutes, we reached the end of the hall. Confused, we turned around and searched again, thinking we had somehow missed it. No room. We came to the conclusion that they must have moved the machines out of the room, since the casino changes things around quite frequently so people don't gain a sense of direction on the game floor. So we once again walked down the hallway in search of an empty room, or at least a set of closed doors that would enter the room. Nothing. No doors even remotely close to where we remembered the room. We were completely dumbfounded and started to question our sanity. All three of us remembered the room in the same location, yet there was nothing. There was no room with slot machines, there was no room at all. To this day, neither me nor my friends understand or can explain how this happened. The fifth story. I'm confident I would have become a missing persons case. To better paint the picture, here is a description of myself at the time of this incident. 3 years ago, 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium-length bleach blonde hair, curvy, 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I have gotten myself out of, so I guess I felt sort of invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety, just in case. About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van started tailing me. I was used to this, since in my city it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitized to this I was. I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street, then back onto the road I was on, and pulled up to me. At this point I still wasn't scared. Again, this has happened so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin, or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for that type of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly, I'm not interested. I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical and may have been twins or brothers. Both men had a very, very dark complexion, dark eyes, and short dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me. They didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a horny pervert to leave me alone, so this is when I started feeling unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to get off. I thought it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with. Just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagine that is what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You are being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and they sped off. I have never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even in the daytime. Stay safe out there. 2 creeps in a van, let's not ever meet. I hope karma finds you both soon. The sixth story. Creepy laughing at night. So usually every year I go to a summer camp off-season, every Memorial Day weekend, to help prepare the camp for the summer. It is in upstate New York. I was there this year already. On my first night, in the early hours of the morning, I was awoken by really loud and creepy laughing. It sounded like it was right next to me and as if there was multiple voices. It was very creepy, but I wasn't up long because I was just too exhausted. The following day, everyone from my cabin and just the general crew at camp were talking about it, 'cause we all heard it. The laughing came from barred owls. The video is exactly what I heard, but there must have been several around camp because what I heard sounded like there could have been 5 or 6 of them. If they were laughing again the next night or my final night there, I must have been deep asleep because I only remember hearing them the first night. The seventh story. What the hell was in that house? Hello there. I'm really glad to have found this community. A lot of similar subreddits are just lacking quality, I suppose. I wanted to talk about some things I experienced. I had other experiences before this, but nothing significant enough to add to this post, considering how long it already is. All of this occurred in Oklahoma, if that matters at all. When I was 12, my mom got with a guy. He was a despicable human being. I say was because he's dead and I'm glad as hell. But anyways, we quickly moved in with him, like, within a month. He had just broken up with his ex and had 2 kids who he barely saw anymore. They came over every other weekend, I think. But that is relevant. My stepdad's mom told me about that house. She said she had experienced weird things there and that my stepdad's ex had, too. That his ex would tell her she came home and all of the kitchen cabinets would be wide open. Stepdad's mom said she would babysit, and early in the morning she would hear children's footsteps, so she'd go check on the kids but they would be sleeping. One of his kids said that in his old room, which became mine, he would hear scratching in the walls. Could have been rodents, but I don't think so. So like I said, I got my stepbrother's old room. The first night I stayed in there, I woke up and was diagonal across the bed. I remember this so vividly and I always have. My head was tilted up. I opened my eyes and there was a little boy in the corner. On the ceiling. Not hanging upside down or anything, just sitting as if there was a surface to be sat on, pressed into the corner of the ceiling. He looked normal. He was wearing modern clothes, a tan shirt and green shorts. He looked about 8. I absorbed all this information what must have been in a second, because when I gasped and blinked he was gone. But it felt like a million years. My door was open and led into the hallway. It was a big hallway, wide, bigger than my entire room. There was a lamp on in the hall. I saw a man's shadow step across the hall. Did not see the man, and it wasn't a shadow person, it was just a shadow. There was no one in the hall. I don't even remember if I was able to go back to sleep or if I stayed awake, but I was absolutely terrified. I hated that room. The whole house always felt weird, kind of sticky. Not the surfaces, the air. Not like humidity though. Sticky isn't the right word, I guess. Kind of grimy. Anyways, after that I begged to sleep on the couch, and I got to for a while. After that I started staying at relatives' houses, even my grandpa's house, which at the time also had minor spooky shit happening, was preferable. I stayed with my grandma and grandpa all the time. I also went to a school that was residential during the weekdays for kids who lived far away because it was a school for visually impaired kids and took students from all over the state. Sometimes they'd let day students stay the night if the dorm wasn't full and if you were a good kid. I'd been doing that since I was very little, but I started doing it as much as the school would allow. I couldn't be residential because I lived in town, though. Basically, I avoided being in that house, and when I was in it I'd try my best to sleep on the couch. I wouldn't even go in my room during the day if I could help it. When I did have to sleep in there, I was so scared. Sometimes I'd hear voices, but just at the edge of my hearing. They always sounded like kids. I don't remember most of what I heard, but I remember hearing "stop" and my name occasionally too. They never sounded frantic, mostly monotone. One time I was laying down, taking a break from doing homework and laying with my eyes closed. I remember feeling a weight near my head, and I opened my eyes to see a black skirt, like a little girl, was sitting next to my head. But when I sat up, there was nothing. I was always scared. I never felt warmth or playfulness like some people say they do with kid ghosts or whatever, only fear. But then, I was also a kid. That room always had a dark-ass shadow casting from it. Partly it was the structure of the house, but it was too dark. When my step-siblings were over, sometimes my step-brother, who was young, around 6 or 7 at the time, would come mess with me. One day I was sitting in my room. I think I was reading. I usually stayed outside or in the living room if I was alone, but my mom and stepdad were home and I hated being around them, and the kids were running in and out of the house, so I didn't go outside because I didn't want to be roped into playing with them. My stepbrother came into my room to mess with me. Now, I wasn't very playful with them usually due to depression, but if they sought me out I would. So we wrestled a bit and he left. A few minutes later my stepdad stormed in asking why I'd thrown this big plastic horse toy I had at him. I was confused because I didn't. But apparently it had flown out of my room and knocked him on the head after he left. Obviously it seemed like I threw it at him. But I didn't. Got in trouble for that one. I threw that damn horse away. I think something followed me around. There were 3 experiences I had outside of the house but while we lived there. Once was just a very vivid nightmare while I was sleeping at school. It felt real, I remember that, but I don't remember much of the nightmare. It took place in the school I was in, and I remember it being dark and empty, but that's all I recall. The next time was when I was sleeping at my grandma's. She always kept the little light above the sink on at night. With the layout of the house, I could see the doorway of the kitchen from where I slept on the couch. I remember seeing a shadow. Again, it looked like a man's shadow. Then I heard a dragging noise, like someone dragging something heavy across the tile. But her kitchen was tiny, there was no space to drag anything. Just the noise. The third and final time I was staying in my grandma's camper. We were at some sort of redneck event, lol. My grandma went to a lot of those. Anyways, I was by myself, she was out socializing. I got a dreadful feeling, and then the camper started shaking. Like, vibrating. I remember a few things falling to the floor. Then it stopped, but the feeling didn't. So I went outside and sat with my grandma. I had told my mom about this stuff. I got sent to a child psychiatrist. They thought I was hallucinating. He found nothing wrong with me other than some irrelevant diagnoses, anxiety, depression, and ADHD. The next time I stayed in that room was the last. I had brought a Bible in because I was religious at the time. I sat with the light on, I slept with the light on, and was reading my Bible. And then something started breathing in the wall behind me. Oh God. Raspy, loud breathing. In the wall. I just left my room and slept on the couch. When I did that without asking, I got in trouble in the morning, but I did not give a shit that night. I was away for about 2 weeks after that night, staying with relatives and at the school. When I came home, I suddenly did not have to sleep in that room anymore. No one told me why. I got moved to a storage room, and damn, I was happy about that. It smelled like wood chips and the walls were all busted up and unpainted, but I did not care. I was so happy. Some weird shit happened in there too, but nothing as bad. Some shadows on the wall, and something consistently darted around the floor and then retreated under my dresser. It was all black and about the size of a young rat, but whenever I shone a flashlight under the dresser there was no rat. Still could have been, I guess, but I don't think it was. It was also way too fast. I keep rats, I've seen them run, they don't run that fast. It made me uneasy, but not the terror that I felt in that room. Sometimes at night it would sound like someone was walking right outside my door, which was freaky, but still, rather in there than in the other room. I still avoided the house with school and relatives, but overall it was a huge relief. Anything but that room. I'd rather sleep in a dumpster. I avoided the house less for spooky reasons and more to be away from my mom and stepdad. A while later we moved. We moved to Texas in an RV, but still owned the old house. One night it was just my stepdad and I on the couch. I asked him why I got to move rooms. This guy was a monster. A horrendous excuse for a person. He abused me in so many ways, and recently I had a discussion with my mom about him, and she revealed that the reason she even let me stay away from home so long with relatives was because she was scared of him. She said he would come home covered in blood in the middle of the night sometimes, which sounds so fake, but I'll attach proof at the bottom. But as he started to tell me, he cried. I had never seen him cry before. Ever. The only emotion I ever saw from him before and after that was anger, but in that moment, he cried. He told me that him and my mom had gotten into a fight and he had slept in my room while I was away. He told me that he heard a man's voice, talking about protecting the children. He said he saw a shadow on the wall of a man holding a rifle. He said there was more, but that he didn't want to say what else happened. There were tears running from his eyes, he wasn't messing with me. When we came back to Oklahoma after he got fired from his job in Texas, we moved into a different house. I have no idea how they got that house, especially while still owning the old one, because we were so poor, we weren't even middle class. Literally no clue. I know there was some drama around it, but how they got that house. But when we went to get the rest of our stuff from the old house, my sister's baby blankets were not where they should have been. They were in the closet of that goddamn room. They were left in my mom's closet. No one ever went in that room, no one put them there. I know I never mentioned my sister, nothing really happened with her that I remember, but my mom had a baby with my stepdad shortly after we moved in, thus, sister. I don't know what was up with that house. I don't know if whatever was in there wanted to physically harm anyone or if it just wanted to scare the shit out of us, especially me. I don't know the significance of that room. I don't know if the two children were like kid spirits or something pretending to be them. I don't know if it was just one entity or multiple. I don't know anything. Nothing weird or paranormal has happened to me since we got out of that house. I'm just glad nothing came with me since it seemed to follow me to mess with me occasionally while we lived there. I do not know. Here is the proof of the covered in blood bit. Edit. I found the address and looked it up. No one owns it now and it's in foreclosure. The pictures give me a pit in my stomach. It's so dark inside. I've been inside an empty house with no electricity, and it looks darker than that, though that definitely could be camera quality and nothing spooky. It's foreboding. It was built in 1955. That's all the info I can find on it. The 8th story. My creepy coworker. I used to work at this fast food chain, not saying which for safety reasons, but I had to recently quit my job due to a new employee hitting on me. I mainly worked the drive-through, and I switched roles each time depending on availability. I happened to be at the pay window, which was very secluded from the kitchen. I didn't mind working it, since I would be alone most of the time. While I was working, a guy about my age came over and introduced himself to me. He told me he was new in town, which I later found out was a lie. Keep in mind I am 16 and he's a year older. He seemed nice enough, and I thought he just wanted to get to know his coworkers. He then proceeded to set his phone down, and told me to put my Snapchat in. That was the first red flag, since he just met me and he didn't even ask for it. I just brushed it off and continued working since it was pretty busy. Later, he came over and put his phone in my hand and said, "Give me your Snapchat." This caught me off guard, and I didn't have time to come up with a lie or an excuse to say no, so I just gave it to him. He told me he would talk to me after his shift, and my whole body shivered. I was anxious the rest of the night, scared he would talk to me. I decided to open my phone, and I saw that he messaged me and posted on his story. I decided to block him, and just leave it at that. When I saw him again, he gave me the stink eye and said something about me blocking him. I just decided to go back to work, but I feared every time I would come in, he would say something to me about it. I talked to my other girl coworkers, and they said that he asked for their Snapchat as well. Even the guys caught on, and he would then make up an excuse for it, or even ask for theirs to cover up his intentions. I contacted my other coworker who had recently left the workplace and asked if she knew about him, and she told me that he has multiple allegations against him, and he was just an overall creep. I finally decided to tell my manager, who was upset and she wished I would have told her sooner. Even though he never did anything to me personally, it still was enough to make me leave. To my ex-coworker, let's never meet again. The 9th story. The White House on the Street. My 20F, 3 best friends, 20F and M, and I began hanging out pretty much every day beginning our senior year of high school. For the purposes of the story, I will refer to my 3 friends as K, H, and C. We live in a typical suburban neighborhood. We would also hang out at K's house nearly every day after school, and always hung out consistently during college breaks and such. So we were driving on K's street a lot. Since we began hanging out, whenever we drove onto K's street, I always saw the White House that was on the right-hand side when you first turn in. We never talked about the house, but just like anyone notes their surroundings, I had that White House ingrained in my head as part of the street. During our sophomore year of college, we were all home on a break. C and I were driving to K's house and I turned onto the street and immediately noticed something was off. There was no White House. C had the same realization at the same time, and having never talked about the White House prior, we both said at the same time that the White House was gone. When we got inside K's house, we told her the White House was gone, and she was incredibly confused. She asked us what we were talking about, we explained, and she said that no White House had ever been there. She and her parents insisted we were just confused because trees were cut down. Yes, trees were cut down, but more importantly the White House was completely gone. They had no clue what we were talking about and even showed us old pictures to prove the White House was never there. H soon arrived and we explained the whole situation, and he remembered the White House too. To this day, C, H, and I have no idea what happened to the White House on the street, and K, her parents, and neighbors insist it was never there. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.